that moment of truth? Like you said, I'm ready to conquer this. Did you have a moment like
I
that?
did have a moment. I'll tell you about it. It's a little bit embarrassing, but I told you that I've told this story enough times. I was in a hospital in West
Oh,
Los Angeles. I was in a hospital on a locked psychiatric unit. I was there to detox. I'm wearing one of these blue gowns with my backside sticking out. And it's a psychiatric unit where I've supervised doctoral students at my
oh
university,
my.
worked there. I'm a patient on that. Colleen and I were in a relationship at that point. We weren't yet married. She left me on the doorstep. I thought we were done. I thought my relationship to my daughter was done because I'd so radically fallen off the pedestal. I felt like I'd lost my reputation. Well, I didn't feel like it. I had lost my reputation. I felt like I lost my job. I lost everything that was identifiably anything that I could resort to for relief. But what
Yeah.
I found in that space where I'd lost everything was that somehow or another, underneath all of this, was some kind of support. I could feel it inside.
Welcome to a new and rebranded Let's Get Mental. Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Let's Get Mental. And this is a really special episode because this is the first in a series that I'm doing called Truth and Triumph. It's a series where I interview guests who are business leaders, influencers, or mental health professionals and advocates who have turned their own mental health journeys or their truth into triumph by either continuing to build and lead businesses and companies despite their mental health struggles, or have turned those struggles, such as myself, into their life's work. So, with that, I am so happy to welcome Dr. Robert Weathers. He is an addiction recovery coach and he has quite a story. So, without ado, Dr. Weathers, thank you so much for joining. Do you like Dr. Bob or
Dr.
Dr.
Bob is just
I
fine.
know.
But Dr. Bob, it always feels endearing to me. A little bit of humor in it. So Dr. Bob is great. Thank
So
you.
please just give us a little summary, like an intro of your, who are you? How did we get
Yeah.
here?
I'll just start with my background. I've got a PhD in clinical psychology. And along the way, I also got graduate and undergraduate degrees in religious studies. And for me,
Wow.
psychology and spirituality have always gone hand in hand. And so I've really taken that seriously across my entire career. I taught in graduate school for 15 years at a local university. I taught doctoral students in psychology. I trained psychologists. And in mid-career, I hit burnout and then I hit addiction. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. The work I've been doing for the last 15 years, which is coincidental with my own personal recovery, I call recovery coaching. It begs the question, well, what the heck is recovery? And because I'm an academic by background, I'm curious about the origins of words. The word addiction derives from a Latin term, it's addictus. And it's interesting, in the Bible, it's translated as a bond servant. That's not only not a term that we use in contemporary language, but it's close enough to say it's synonymous with being a slave, to be enslaved or to be in servitude to something. And when I think about addiction, and you know kind of how that goes in terms of our conversations, I look at addiction very much as an umbrella term for anything that I'm in service to that takes me away from my life, takes me away from my birthright. And so when I think about recovery, what is it that we're recovering? We're recovering our birthright, why we're here, what we want to contribute. And addiction, I know this personally and on the work I do. Addiction, first of all, starts by compromising that and eventually hijacks it completely, takes it away.
So that's how they kind of differentiate between the two types.
Yeah.
I'm sure seeing someone after treatment is, it's probably been a really intense experience for them. And I do have a statistic here on recovery coaches. If you're coming post discharge, engaging with a recovery coach is associated with an 84% engagement rate in outpatient services at 6 months post discharge, compared to only 34% for those without coaching.
I figure that probably about three-quarters of the clients I work with are able to get around the bend on addiction and actually sustain long-term recovery. It's not a empirical, like there hasn't been a study. That's just my sense. The majority really do succeed. And I'm not talking about temporarily stop an addictive behavior like drinking. And so a year later, they sustain it. I have clients that I'll follow up over the course of time. I usually work with clients intensively early on, once or twice a week, and then we pare back as soon as things begin to level out. I just saw a client yesterday that I see him every 6 weeks. He was heavily addicted to opiates just a few years ago. He's sustained it all these years. He likes to touch base with me, but that's really all it is. It's just kind of sustaining, that's what makes my work so satisfying. It's not to say that there aren't failures.
They're not ready.
In the realm of addiction recovery, there's what's referred to as stages of recovery. Where are you at? Are you considering wanting to recover? I get clients coming in, they're not really considering that they have a problem. Those are the clients that really won't succeed, because if you don't realize that you have a problem, then there's no motivation to change. People will come in and they're really involuntary. They're coming in because their mom or their dad or their husband or their wife or their boss sent them in. Psychology says, it talks about internal locus of control. You have to get it internally located inside yourself that I want to change my life. And once you do that, then my work is thoroughly pleasurable.
And I suppose getting around that, let me just read a few more statistics. So alcohol, I just want the audience to know, roughly 27.9 million Americans have an alcohol use disorder. Alcohol misuse accounts for approximately 178,000 deaths annually in the US. Around 28.2 million Americans live with a drug use disorder. Marijuana is the most commonly used illicit drug, with over 64 million past year users. What is your opinion on this whole edibles, mushrooms, CBD versus THC? Just unpack that a little bit.
I have a very pragmatic understanding of addiction. And I have virtually no judgment of it. I'd be the world's biggest hypocrite because I've lived addiction myself. It would be any behavior that provides short-term relief for me. And here's the clincher. It provides short-term relief, but eventually the long-term consequences outweigh the short-term benefits. So if we talk about THC and gummies, if that was working for you and didn't create any long-term consequences that were costly to you, I would not count that as an addiction. I would have been applauding for you. So it's three parts: short-term benefit, long-term cost, and loss of freedom. Most people are able to drink, for example, in moderation. I've got zero judgment about drinking. I moved from drinking in moderation to drinking in immoderation. I macrodosed everything. That's the Bob Weathers journey, I guess. The clients that come to see me, their lives are falling apart, typically in one of three areas. Their relationships are suffering, their work, whether in the home or outside the home, is suffering, and their health is suffering. Their physical and mental health is suffering. Those are the people that I see. And that, by definition, that defines the addiction. That is really a medical definition. Does that help to kind of lay the groundwork?
Yeah, I just think about my own experience. I did like the CBD melatonin, no problem. But I did try THC gummies for a bit, and there's definitely an effect on me, at least on my brain. So I knew that I couldn't do that long term at all. Having a daughter and everything.
See, that discernment right there, Ligai, is the one you go, it had consequences. I didn't want to have the effect on me and my daughter. Somebody who's been trapped into the addictive spiral won't be able to stop that. They might even think the same thing, but I can't stop it. You were able to stop it. Somebody who can't stop it, that's a whole nother problem. They come see Dr. Bob at that point.
And I send them to Dr. Bob. Let's talk about your story.
The story is this. Bob was a little star growing up. I grew up in a really tumultuous family. Both parents were really challenged and challenging, and a lot of difficulty. I have three siblings, so I was the star student, the star athlete, the star musician, the star citizen, all of that. It's one of the ways that I coped was I just had to rise above this. I didn't realize it would have a shadow side to it, and it did. Literally, as I went through graduate school, went through a 6-year doctoral program, went to a Christian seminary, came out of that, was ready to go, was hired immediately at a local university, as I mentioned, teaching in their graduate school. There I am, right out of a doctoral program. I'm teaching doctoral students. I did that for 15 years. About halfway through those 15 years, I began to burn out, starting in my 40s. I was always used to achieving at the level I was, and I ran faster and faster. And at some point, without getting into a lot of the details, I had so many plates spinning that began to catch up with me. And it would manifest as insomnia, it would manifest as anxiety, it would manifest as a kind of a flatness, a bit of depression. And for the first time, I began turning to alcohol to help kind of take the edge off. It was a 15-year process. It started with the first drink, and now it was 2 drinks. I was so straight that I had never smoked a cigarette until I was 45. almost predictable as I began to find my way of coping with my burnout and running faster and faster as I aged, as the pressure mounted. I never took on less responsibility as I became more and more addicted to substances. It started with alcohol, soon it included marijuana and then other drugs. And it's just kind of mind blowing. I still pinch myself sometimes, Ligaya, because I was just like every mother's dream of a son or a child that they want to have marry their daughter, really, because I was
Oh,
such goody two shoes in hindsight. I didn't feel that way because it was just who I was. But when I stopped being that, then that was the unreality. The fact is, then I hit the wall. And so at the end of those 15 years, I got so addicted, and the problems that arose from that, I lost my academic position because of addiction. I was so devastated because I loved teaching and so ashamed, had not done any of the work around whatever it was that, would keep me running so fast. I had not addressed the burnout. So predictably, I kept doing whatever I'd done that had led up to the addiction. Plus now I had shame and loss. And so I got even more addicted. I eventually lost my license as a psychologist owing to my addiction. I was a tenured full faculty, full professor. You have to really mess up bad to lose it.
I have to stop you for 1 second. You've said the word shame many,
Yeah.
many times. It seems like shame, trauma from childhood, shame and guilt. It really accompanies these conditions, these addictions.
You probably know this from your work and from your life. I protected myself from feelings of vulnerability by always being a star. And when I fell off the pedestal, then I was exposed to the vulnerability and the shame that hit me. It almost killed me. And what I mean by that is I just kept doing more and more alcohol and drugs. It was not getting better, it was getting worse. And for the first time in my life, and I don't know if you'll identify with this or not, Lagaya, I'd never experienced this before. I began looking at myself almost as if through the eyes of other people, and the assumption was they were judging me because failure was so public, and I could not see that. That would be a definition of shame.
Absolutely.
There's something wrong with me. Everybody sees that, and while I can look back on it and realize in hindsight that that was 99% projection, some people saw me that way, but most people, anybody that loved me, didn't see me that way. That's shame. Psychology talks about what they call the fundamental attribution error. And it's a fundamental error, which means everyone does this. And the error is this, is that you take Bob Weathers and you take his circumstances of his life, the trauma of his childhood, the burnout of his adulthood, and his getting addicted. And then you say, well, you know what? He's just a lousy addict. That's the fundamental attribution error, is that you take that and you turn that into who I am. I did that to myself. And what I've come to see in hindsight, psychology talks about moving from that first kind of attribution to somebody's character. That's called a dispositional attribution. And moving to what they call looking at the circumstances of Bob's life, that's called the situational attribution. I needed to move to realize I'm not fundamentally an addict. I'm not fundamentally a loser. But if I don't change my life, I will continue to be vulnerable to all of these things, including addiction that I have been. It's a killer in addiction because think of this. Here's a statistic for you. Johns Hopkins University has the best school of public health on the planet. And they did a study some years ago to look at the various diagnoses that can be given, mental health diagnoses that can be given to individuals, depression, anxiety, personality disorders, thought disorders, the whole concatenation. And they looked at them in terms of what has the most negative judgment. The very bottom of the barrel, the diagnosis has the most negative judgment are so-called substance use disorders, what you and I are calling addiction right now. In our society, there's nothing that's judged more mercilessly, far better that I have a thought disorder, a psychotic thought disorder, than I be addicted. And so there's that huge stigma, which is just a collective version of shame. And I internalize that because I'm at the bottom of the barrel. The fact is that'll keep me in my addiction. It'll take me out, is that there's so much judgment around that.
Absolutely. And when I was going through postpartum, nobody judged me the way I did, right? So it was my shame. But I thought everybody must think I'm the worst mother. Everyone must think I'm a total failure. Shit, but nobody was thinking that. My family wasn't. My husband at the time wasn't thinking about that. We judge ourselves more harshly than others. I think the stigma from the outside looking in for addiction and substance use disorders is that there's an association with a person's weakness. They can't control this. They can't get a handle on it. Look at them, pull it together. Come on. This is under your control. Is it under their control?
One of my favorite authors in this field is Dr. Kevin McCauley, and he talks
Yep.
about addiction as being a disease of choice. And what he means by that is the part of our brain that can make choices. Lagaya, I'm imagining this is true for you, and you can bet your bottom dollar it's true for me. I was always able to achieve what I put my mind to. I was always able to overcome obstacles. I just had never experienced not being able to do that. I lost the ability to be able to discontinue the behavior, and how Dr. Kevin McCauley talks about the part of our brain that makes choices, the part of our brain that makes moral decisions, the part of our brain that the executive center of the brain. If you take you and me up the road to UCLA and hook us up to an MRI right now, and you're in the worst of your postpartum, and I'm in the worst of my addictive
You'll see it.
behaviors,
Yeah.
the frontal cortex, the
Yeah.
part of the brain that's in control of choice, it's dark. It's
Yeah, it's
offline.
true.
What's alive is the reward center of the brain, which is attached to addiction. And it's also the emotional center of the brain. I'm thinking of postpartum depression. That's what's active. And so what's lit up is the limbic system. And in between our ears, the frontal cortex is shut down. I think about this in terms of the program of saying, just say no. You can just say no as long as you can just say no. But if you don't have the capacity to just say no, that's just water off a duck's back. It's going to go in one ear and out the other. That's the way it was for me. That was part of the shame for me, and probably for you too, is that I've always been able to conquer self-doubt
Yeah.
or obstacles, as I say, and I wasn't able to do this. I remember for the first time in my life, I was scared being inside my skin because I did not have control of something. It was the sense of being out of control with that. I would want people to
Absolutely.
understand that too from the outside, including loved ones. We're not talking about making excuses for the addiction. It's not about that. I don't believe about being soft on it. I think we have to be truthful, but there has to be mercy. There has to be compassion with that. The compassion is that Bob and Lagaya can't help themselves right now. We need to help them get back in control, but please don't judge me, because if you judge me, that actually adds fuel to the fire. The single most stressful human emotion we're talking about right now. This research was done at Harvard. Look at spikes in cortisol, which is
Uh-huh.
one of the two stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. The strongest spike in cortisol is related to shame. Fear of social judgment. It's more stressful than anger. It's more stressful than fear. It's more stressful than sadness. And you think about it, it makes sense. Is that if I'm not going to be accepted by you, and we live out on the Serengeti plain, and I'm going to be cast out of the village, I'm going to get eaten up by a saber-toothed tiger. I need to feel shame. If I'm messing up our relationship, I need to feel some very strong emotion. It's the strongest emotion because it's survival related. Well, that got activated in spades for me.
What was that moment of truth? I would say, like you said, I'm ready to conquer this. Like, I'm ready now. What did you have a moment like
I
that?
did. I did have a moment. I'll tell you about it. It's a little bit embarrassing, but I told you that I've told this story enough now. I was in a hospital, completely relegated to zero. And in that place, I felt some kind of relief. I wrote it down at the time. And what I wrote is I said, the strange thing about this is that at this point of greatest loss, I feel some kind of relief or even liberation. And it gets even weirder, Lagaya, because I remember writing, I think there's going to come a day in the not too distant future where I'm going to be nostalgic for this kind of clarity, which is to say, things are going to get better for Bobby. My life will start coming back together, God willing. And I'm actually going to long for the kind of purity and the clarity that's been granted me here. The truth is that happened, is that life did get better for me. I lost that crystal clarity, but I'm telling you that it's been 15 years ago. I've never forgotten that experience. And now, and even right now, I have the chills in my body. Colleen and I were just talking about this the other day. She referred to it in the language I use. It was a moment of extraordinary grace when there's nothing else left. There's something else. Because of my own Christian faith, it's how I understand the symbol of Jesus on the cross, where he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's me in the hospital. And then underneath that, into thy hands I commend my spirit. It wasn't in Christian language. There wasn't a light in the room. Me in my blue robe with my butt hanging out. I've never forgotten. And what it did is there's something underneath the shame for me. Now, the fact is that early on in my recovery, I spent about 90% of my time being shamed hopelessly. I mean, just really in shame. I can still be vulnerable to shame. There's no magic bullet in this life. That said, I'm probably 10% vulnerable to shame right now, which is to say, if somebody, you wouldn't do this, but if you wanted to shame me, you can start pulling out details of my life and I would start feeling shame because I'm a feeling human being, but I'm not vulnerable to it anymore. And it's this experience I had in the hospital that was the bedrock, is that underneath all of that is something that catches us. Call it grace, call it God, call it whatever you want to, that allows me to be compassionate towards myself. I no longer take up permanent residence in self-judgment. And it isn't like I will that, it was given me. It was given me.
So when you talk about, 25% don't make it through your program, or they're not ready to do it, you don't call it a
That's how
failure. Anybody that takes the initiative to come to you probably
yeah.
does want to get better, right?
And that's what you have to discern early on, because people will look like they're doing it on their own volition, but they're not. They're doing it with gun to head. My goal is to turn an involuntary client into a voluntary client. And sometimes that takes a period of time, and sometimes it takes them to live a little bit more in the addiction, live a little bit more in their life, maybe mature a little bit, and think enough already. I literally have clients come to me a year later, 2 years
Of
later,
course.
right off to the races.
So, to somebody that says to you, "Hey, Dr. Bob, this has been great, but I don't think this is for me right now." What do you tell them if you know they're on the verge of perhaps relapsing?
I've told you I've been in this field for all these years. I can remember back in the mid 80s, this dates me, but I was in my first private practice. I have clients come in, they'd say, they'd work with me for a session or two, and they'd be dealing with, let's say, massive trauma. And they'd say, I think I'm good. It's two things that come to mind, Lagai, and it'll manifest differently because it's so individual with each client. I would never neglect saying, these are my concerns, or these are things you want to be on the lookout for. I just say, that makes sense to me, and the door's always open. I don't want to shame somebody for not being ready. At the same time, I don't want to leave them with misinformation. So it's like holding both of those. I've had clients so-called terminate with me after a few sessions, and they'd come back a week or two later and say, I realize that I'm not ready to stop, because we left the door open. We didn't shame them.
What do you have to say to people who are trying to love and support someone going through addiction when the person is at the bottom and you need to just cut off? What is your advice?
I have issues with the term tough love because it can be used almost sadistically or non-compassionately. With Colleen, with my daughter, with my friends, with my work, with my clients, I feel accountability. There needs to be a level of truth. Of telling the truth is like, there need to be boundaries, limits set. But it won't work if that's all there is, because there also has to be compassion. There also has to be mercy. There also has to be grace. And what they've given me is equal parts truth and mercy. I wouldn't want to go back to who I was 25 or 30 years ago. And it's really a function of having been supported by the Colleens. My daughter is Amanda, my friends in my life. Truth in terms of boundaries. Colleen was very clear about that, about me needing to stick with the program. And she's been incredibly merciful. And I start crying in a minute because of the incredible grace that she and my daughter have given me. Absolutely. You think about it, if I drop you, if you're in the middle of struggling with postpartum depression or addiction or anything else like it, if I drop you, there might be a need to set a boundary, but if I drop you, how's that going to be anything that other than creating more of a sense of separation or shame for you? And I can understand why people do it humanly, but it's not helpful. It's not helpful to
I
abandon when
don't.
they're at their lowest.
So tell me, when you think about the word triumph, what does that word mean to you?
When I was studying Christian theology in seminary, there's what was referred to as Christian triumphalism, and it's the idea that all is victorious, everything's getting better and better every day in every way. And frankly, part of my disaffection with organized religion for decades for me was that very approach, which was it would ignore suffering, it would ignore darkness, and it was everything was victorious, everything was triumphal. And I'm not about throwing out the good of that, but there's a shadow side to that gets ignored. When I was in undergraduate, I was also a religious studies major. I studied ancient Greek, and we studied the word that gets translated in the New Testament as perfection, to be perfect. Now, you and I here in the United States would think of that as being perfection would be without fault or without blame or without blemish. That was not their understanding of the word that we translate as perfect. The word is teleos, that's the Greek word, and it connotes wholeness or completion. It does not connote cutting off the bad. It's good and bad together somehow as a single. The word integrity comes from the word integer. An integer is a whole number. To have integrity is to be a whole number. It's not to be a part number. It's not to be a fraction. And so, what I want to tell you in regards to triumph, and I feel the chills again because I know this resonates for me, and I hope it does for you too, Lakaya, is that if there's a triumph in this, it's like finally Bobby the star was able to grasp Bobby's the vulnerable one, Bobby the one who needs compassion for himself, Bobby the one who's not always the star, Bobby the one who needs help, all of those things. Bobby the one who has shadow, who has fears and anxieties and greed and the attitude, all the judgment and all those things. That makes you Lagaya, that makes me Bob. And I feel much more able to embrace all of me. And so if it's triumph, that's what I'm interested in, would be really looking at you and me as whole people, which means that includes your biography with postpartum depression, my biography with addiction. And that doesn't define who you are, Lagaya, any more than it defines who I am. It's a part of my being. I'll always have scars from that. They remind me to stay humble. They remind me of where I am. When I'm with other people, I can join them, as you can. You can join with somebody's darkness or suffering.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really grateful. So if there's a triumph, it's that kind of triumph. If there's a perfection, it's that kind of perfection, but not the way that we typically think about it. It's been a hard lesson to learn, but I've got it now. Thank you very much.
That's a triumph in itself, because now we can help other people who may be going through the struggles we did.
The only thought I have is I've so enjoyed being with you. If one person watches you and I today and is touched or moved in a way, this is a bargain. I feel so grateful for this opportunity. So thank you.
That was Dr. Bob Weathers on Let's Get Mental for the Truth and Triumph series. I want people to hear these stories, to know that you can have mental health struggles. You can be down with them, where you absolutely can't do anything else but try to fight and recover. And that's not the last of you. You will get up and you will triumph, as long as you're committed and you love yourself enough, and you give yourself enough grace, and you give yourself enough resources, and you advocate for yourself to get up and continue. Godspeed to anyone out there who is struggling with a mental health condition or a substance use disorder. This was a great conversation. I will have information on how to contact Dr. Bob and his books on my Instagram page and Facebook page. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.